Hey guys, tonight we drop into the Middle Ages. Your feet bare, your breath showing, and someone just slammed the cottage door. You blink in the smoky dark, hear whispers about rising rents and rumors from the manor. Unfortunately, you were born poor, which means the story starts hard and doesn't let up. If mellow history helps you relax, go ahead and like and subscribe. It's free, and you can always change your mind later. Let me know where you're listening from and what time it is. Now, breathe slowly. Let the straw crinkle beneath you. The fire crackles low. The world is about to open. You wake up on straw because that's what poor people slept on. Not soft straw either. This is last year's, clumped with grime, flattened into a sort of mat by your siblings' elbows, knees, and occasional vomiting. There's no mattress, no privacy, no such thing as a room unless you're in a manor. Just one damp space, one smoky hearth, and one leaky roof that's doing its best impression of rainfall, indoors. A rat skitters across your feet. You don't scream. It's not the first time. You name them sometimes for fun. That one's missing an ear. Probably old crooked. There are worse things than rats in here. For instance, cold. It's not turn up the thermostat cold. It's we burn animal dung if we're lucky cold. Which, yes, smells exactly how you imagine. But it's fuel. And when the winter wind starts blowing through the cracks in the wooden walls, you'd be amazed what starts smelling like salvation. You stumble to your feet, stub a toe on something metal. Was that the pot or your brother's slop bucket? And wander toward the embers. No one swept last night. No one ever really sweeps. Dirt floor, remember? You just rearrange the filth. The door's made of thin wood, swollen by rain. It creaks, sighs, sticks. You push hard. It finally groans open. And outside? More mud. Just more. You live in a hut on a patch of land technically owned by a lord whose face you've never seen. Your family's been borrowing this land since before anyone can remember. It's called being a villain, close to a slave, but with just enough illusion of freedom to keep hope on life support. If it rains, everything becomes soup. And it rains often. Mud on your clothes, mud in your boots. Wait. Sorry. You don't have boots. You tie cloth to your feet, maybe. Or nothing at all. Calluses are free. There's no proper chimney in your hut. The smoke from last night's fire? Still here. Thick, acrid, blinding. That cough you've had since you were 6? That's smoke lung. Not that anyone calls it that. It's just life. You might have one wooden bowl to your name, maybe a spoon if you're lucky, but you definitely don't have money. Not real money. Most trade happens in eggs or favors, or the vague threat of God's punishment if someone doesn't return your borrowed scythe. Oh, and your water. Comes from a stream, same one the animals use, same one your neighbor uses to do laundry. Same one they used to wash the body of the guy who died of something wet and coughing. Historians still argue whether medieval peasants understood water contamination, but you've noticed that when it smells funny, your stomach hurts after. There's no glass in the windows, just wooden shutters, which do a great job of keeping out light and nothing else. When storms roll in, they bang like warning drums. And if a wind hits right, it'll scatter ashes across your stew. Again, let's talk stew. Your breakfast is probably leftover pottage. That's a thin porridgey sludge made from whatever was lying around last night. Barley, turnips, a carrot if someone didn't steal it. It sits in a pot over the fire, bubbling endlessly, gaining flavors from every hand that's dipped in since Tuesday. It tastes like hot, wet endurance. Meat. What meat? You don't eat meat unless someone gives birth to a pig with 3 legs, or the priest throws leftovers your way. Mostly, it's roots, oats, and the concept of flavor. You smell like you. Everyone does. There's no soap, there's no tub, there is a stream, but washing there means freezing or getting spotted by the boys from the next hut. So you settle for wiping yourself with a cloth and calling it good enough. Fun fact, some people tried rubbing themselves with rosemary or mint leaves to cover the stench. You just stick with pretend no one notices. Fleas are just part of the ecosystem now. You scratch your arms raw some nights. Your dog has them too. Yes, your mangy half-dog, half-wolf companion you didn't ask for but somehow adopted. You call him Bitey. The village is small. Maybe 30 huts, maybe 100 people. Everyone knows everything about everyone. Secrets don't last long here. You once tried sneaking a slice of someone's bread from the drying rack. They still bring it up 5 years later. Your mom? She's been old since she was 25. Your dad? Bent like a question mark from years of hauling, tilling, cutting, digging. His hands are so calloused they could sand wood, and they often do. There are no schools here. Reading? For monks, maybe the priest. You might know how to count to 10, but only if the steward needs help tallying his hens. You do know the seasons, though, not just for the crops, but because they decide whether you're freezing, soaked, bitten, or blistered. One winter, your neighbor's roof caved in under snow. She and her baby huddled under a broken cart for 2 nights. That cart is still there, by the way, now used as a drying rack. Your ceiling? Covered in thatch. It leaks. Always has. You jam bits of cloth into the worst holes, but eventually it just drips somewhere else. Rain is not an event. It's an ongoing condition. And mold? It's part of the decor. Sometimes the Lord's men ride through on horseback. They don't speak to you. They don't need to. They look clean, shiny, terrifying. One flick of their whip, and suddenly someone's paying extra tax. You don't ask questions. You nod, you bow, you keep your head down. The scariest part? You don't think it's strange. You think this is how life works. It's always been like this. Your grandparents died here. So will you. And yet, when the sun hits the frost just right, and the cows low in the distance, and your mother hums while shelling peas, there's a strange kind of peace, a rhythm, a tiny pulse of something warm, like you've learned to be content in a world that's forgotten you. Just don't get too cozy. There's smoke in the wind. That means another fire. And you know what that means. You're hungry. Again, you're almost always hungry. It's morning, probably. You can't exactly check a clock, since the only timekeeping in the village is the church bell, and Father Edric is notoriously unpredictable about ringing it on time. So you go by gut, and your gut is definitely saying, "Feed me, or I will stage a protest." You shuffle over to the pot hanging in the hearth. It's still there from last night, still bubbling, still brown, still mostly turnip. You poke it with a stick. Steam rises. There's a chunk of something floating near the top. You squint. Could be parsnip, could be rat. Either way, it's breakfast. No one expects breakfast to be exciting. That's a modern invention. Here, you eat whatever's edible, and you're grateful it didn't crawl away first. If you're lucky, there's yesterday's crusty bread to dip. It's gone rock hard overnight, of course, but that's good. It scrapes your tongue clean of soot. You break the bread with your teeth, which complain loudly. You've already lost 2 molars, and you're not even 15. Not uncommon. Dental care in the Middle Ages is mostly ignore it until the tooth gives up and exits. You chew in silence while your younger brother tries to fish out the good bits from the pot. He gets the same goop you did. He sighs. You sigh louder just to win. The thing is, it doesn't get better with age. Even grown men have the same meals. Pottage, bread, onions if they're lucky, cheese on feast days, and beer. Always beer. Not the fancy kind either. Thin, weak, barely alcoholic ale, brewed just strong enough to kill the bacteria that's guaranteed in your water. Kids drink it too. You do, not because you're trying to be edgy, but because it's the only liquid that won't turn your intestines into a battlefield. Historians still argue whether medieval peasants ate enough calories to work as hard as they did. What's clear is this: if they did, it came from the sheer volume of bread and porridge they crammed into their faces daily. Carbs were your religion. Fat? A fantasy? Protein? Only on holidays, or if something dies near you. You finish your portion in 3 bites, lick your fingers, because waste is sin, and wipe your hand on your tunic, which has never once been truly clean. Your mother once tried washing clothes in lye and river water. The clothes came back stiffer and smellier. Now she just shakes out the dirt and calls it laundry. Your neighbors are stirring. Someone's shouting about chickens again. One's escaped. Again. You don't remember a time when it wasn't running around like it had a personal vendetta against fences. Maybe it does. Maybe it's the smartest one in the village. You step outside, your door being a piece of wood tied with rope, and squelch into the mud. The whole path is more sludge than ground. Your feet sink. A duck waddles past like it owns the place. You're old enough to work and poor enough that you don't have a choice. Your task today? Gleaning. That means walking the already harvested field to find the scraps missed by the reapers. It's backbreaking, eye-squinting labor for the chance to gather a handful of leftover barley. But hey, every crumb counts. You pass old Marta, bent double with a basket on her back. She mutters to herself about the price of flour and the mayor's donkey. No one listens. No one has time. Survival is loud and urgent. The fields stretch long and wide, golden if the season is kind, gray if it isn't. You trail behind the harvesters like a shadow, fingers brushing dirt, always watching for glinting kernels or forgotten root vegetables. Sometimes you get lucky. Sometimes you find nothing but footprints. Once, someone found a coin out here. A real one. They disappeared 2 days later. No one asked questions. You just all pretended they'd gone to visit family in another village. The only thing that visits are wolves and tax collectors. You work until your back aches and your fingers are raw. Then you work some more. Lunch? Maybe a bit more bread. If you can sit long enough to chew it. If the bailiff doesn't call you for another task. Here's a fun fringe tidbit. In some villages, poor kids were expected to collect dung for fuel. Not just animal dung. All dung. Human included. It's called night soil, and if that sounds like something out of a fantasy novel, it's not. It was your after-school job. You'd scoop it with a wooden paddle, dump it into buckets, and carry it to the compost heap. Or to the fields, depending on the season. Nothing says character building like a faceful of fermenting filth. And yet, this was valuable. Without it, crops wouldn't grow, which means no bread, which means no pottage, which means you die. So you did it. You all did. You held your breath, hoped for no slippage, and got to scooping. Your reward? Maybe a boiled turnip, maybe a nod from your dad, maybe just the sweet, sweet silence of not being yelled at. The sun starts to lower. Your arms burn. Your stomach growls. You pass the baker's hut on the way home, and the smell almost knocks you over. Fresh loaves. He's baking for the manor again, those big, fluffy white rounds you only get if a festival goes really well. You glance through the slatted window. He sees you, doesn't smile, just keeps kneading. You don't blame him. He's barely less poor than you are, and the manor taxes flour like it's gold dust. Dinner is the same as breakfast. Same pot, same scrape. This time, maybe it's thicker, or maybe your tongue's just numb. You eat with your family. No table, just laps. No chairs, just stones or boxes. Conversation is minimal. You're all too tired. There's a knock on the door. Your little sister gasps. Strangers aren't common, but it's just old Lewin, hawking some leftover fish. Smells like despair. Tastes worse. You buy it anyway. One small trade of your gleaned barley for a hunk of salt-crusted scales. After dark, the cold creeps in again. You curl into the straw, pull the itchy wool blanket over your head. Listen to the wind rattle the shutters. Someone's snoring. Someone's coughing. Someone whispers a prayer. You're not religious because it's fashionable. You're religious because it's the only hope anyone gives you. Heaven is warm. Heaven has food. Heaven doesn't leak. But tonight, this is what you have. A stomach half full. A roof half functional. A life that's hard, dirty, cold, and weirdly peaceful, if only because you're too tired to protest. And that's just one day. You're 7, maybe 8. No one's really sure. Birthdays aren't celebrated in your village, not unless you're noble, or the priest feels particularly inspired to bless a baby with 2 working legs. For the poor, you're born, you cry, you grow teeth, and one day, someone just starts handing you chores. Congratulations, you're useful now. Childhood ends quietly. No ceremony, no school photos, no warm nostalgia. One day you're chasing chickens for fun. The next day, you're chasing them because it's your job. Your morning starts with hauling water. The bucket's wooden, leaky, and older than your oldest sibling. The stream is a 10-minute walk, but the mud and the mule traffic make it feel like hours. You drag the bucket behind you like a miniature cart horse. Your feet sink with every step. On the way back, you spill half of it. That earns you a scolding, a clout, or both. Your arms ache before the sun's even risen. And here's the kicker. No one pities you. Because they all did it too. Your parents, your grandparents, that grumpy neighbor who throws turnips at passing dogs. This is the chain of labor, passed down like a family heirloom, except it's heavier and never, ever shiny. Once the water's in, you're sent back out. The pigs need feeding. They always need feeding. You hate the pigs. Not because they're pigs, but because they're better fed than you. They get scraps. Actual scraps. Sometimes bread. Even cheese rinds. You watch them eat and wonder, how did my life end up below a pig in the social ladder? Then you remember, you're poor. That's how. You're also responsible for firewood, which means finding twigs, hauling logs, or bribing someone else to do it with the only coin you've ever held. An acorn you pretend is magic. It works once, then you get punched. Sometimes you babysit, not the modern kind with snacks and story time, the medieval kind where you sit on a stool and pray the baby doesn't fall into the fire, or the well, or disappear under a goat. Older kids do real labor. You watch them with equal parts fear and envy. Fear because you know it's your future. Envy because they get to work outside the house. That's the goal, weirdly. Freedom through plowing. Historians still argue whether medieval children understood their status in the hierarchy. You do. You know the baker's boy eats better. You know the Reeve's daughter gets shoes. You know your clothes are mostly patches pretending to be fabric. One sleeve is made from sackcloth, literally a flour sack. Your mother stitched it to your tunic after rats chewed through the original. You called it your lucky arm. It didn't help. Education. That's hilarious. You've never seen a book. You've seen the priest hold one, but only from a distance and always in Latin. The closest you get to learning is memorizing prayers and understanding when to duck. Still, you do learn things. How to recognize a snake hole. How to keep your bread safe from crows. How to lie convincingly about whether the chickens escaped again. There are games, technically, but they're often indistinguishable from chores. Let's pretend we're knights quickly becomes let's chase that goose and get yelled at by Farmer Theobald. There's a fun one where you spin in a circle until you fall. Once, someone spun into a fire pit. That game ended. Quirky historical tidbit. One documented medieval children's game involved dragging a log while others beat it with sticks, pretending it was a fox. Why? No one knows. But the symbolism feels accurate. You have friends, kind of. But friendship here is based on convenience and shared suffering. You don't talk about feelings. You talk about who got bread, whose dad is angriest, and whether the well frog is back. Sometimes you laugh. That's important. Humor is survival. Like when the steward tripped on a piglet and landed in the slop pile. You'll be talking about that for months. But laughter is fleeting, because someone always calls your name next. Your family expects you to be helpful. All the time. You don't get days off. You barely get moments off. Even when you're sick, you're expected to stir the pot or shoo away crows. You remember once having a fever so bad your teeth chattered for hours. Your father wrapped you in old blankets, muttered a prayer, and told you not to die before the barley harvest. You didn't. Bonus points. Sometimes you sneak away. Into the woods. Not far. Just far enough to sit under a tree and pretend you're not you. You look up through the leaves and wonder what the sky looks like in another village, in another life. You find a beetle, watch it crawl. It has no idea how lucky it is, no taxes, no pigs, no spoiled broth. Of course, you don't get to daydream for long. Someone's always yelling. A cart's broken. The sheep are loose. Your older brother is trying to fight a goose again. You run back, because running is faster than guilt. Evenings are worse than mornings, because you're tired and you still have to clean the hearth, patch your tunic, and haul in more wood. You hear your parents whispering about the manor steward, about new fees, about selling the goat. You know what that means. Less milk, less trade, more hunger. You're not supposed to understand these things, but you do. You all do. Kids here grow up fast, or they don't grow up at all. And sometimes someone just disappears. A cough that never stops. A fever that burns too hot. One day, a sibling's there. The next day, the blanket is folded and no one talks about it. Grief is quiet here. Quick. Buried under chores. At night, you curl up in the same scratchy blanket next to the same familiar smell of unwashed bodies and old wool. You don't cry, not because you're brave, but because crying takes energy you don't have. You think about dreams sometimes, not grand ones, just warm ones. A full loaf of bread, a dry roof, a pair of shoes that don't belong to 3 other people first. And then you sleep, because tomorrow's coming, and you've got more water to carry. The bells wake you. Again. Not birdsong, not sunshine, not a gentle breeze whispering through hand-woven curtains. What even are curtains? No. Your morning starts with a distant clang-clang, echoing across the fields like a grumpy metal rooster. The church bell rings 7 times, or maybe 8. It's hard to tell. Father Edric's not exactly consistent, and half the time he's still half asleep when he pulls the rope. Either way, it means move. Everything in your day flows from that bell. You get up. You wash your face, kind of, with water that's slightly less green than yesterday's. You jam your feet into shoes that are more whole than leather. And then you shuffle out the door, blinking against the low sun and high expectations. You're not a morning person. But in the Middle Ages, no one gets to be a morning person. You rise when the bells say, and you work until your body decides it can't anymore. And where do the bells come from? The church, of course. The massive stone giant in the middle of your village. Tall, echoing, and terrifying. Half the village could probably fit inside it. Though, let's be honest, you'd only go in if you absolutely had to. You're not technically banned from the church, but you're not exactly welcome either, especially if your feet are muddy, which they always are. Inside, It smells like beeswax and cold stone and regret. Candles burn near the altar, casting weird shadows that make saints look like they're judging you harder than your aunt does when you forget to say grace. The priest, Father Edric, is ancient, or maybe just 35. It's hard to tell under the layers of linen, incense, and exhaustion. He speaks in Latin, waves his hands a lot, and talks about sin at least 3 times per sentence. You don't understand a single word. Most villagers don't. Latin is the language of God, they say. Which is strange because God never seems to speak your language when it matters. Still, you go to Mass. Everyone does. Not going is dangerous. People start asking questions. The priest might pay you a visit. And by visit, we mean he'll show up with a stick and a look like he just swallowed a bee. Historians still argue whether most peasants were genuinely devout or just devout out of fear. You believe in God. Mostly because not believing in God is a good way to get very cold, very alone, very fast. Religion is everywhere. Literally, it's in your speech, every God willing, and by the saints, tossed between chores. It's in your calendar, feast days, fast days, saints days, and that one Tuesday, you're not allowed to eat eggs. You wear a little cross around your neck, made from wood, not gold. Carved by your uncle during one of his quiet months after the Baron caught him poaching rabbits. It's not pretty, but it keeps the worst dreams away. You cross yourself before eating, before sleeping, before passing the graveyard. Because you're poor, and when you're poor, faith is like soup. You add a little to everything because it's cheap and fills the gaps. But the church doesn't just feed your soul, it also watches your behavior. Father Edric once gave a sermon about how laughing too loudly might invite demons into your lungs. You try not to laugh at all anymore, except when the geese attack visitors. Even the demons would laugh at that. The church also decides who gets forgiven. Spoiler, it's not you. You stole half a turnip once. You confessed. You got 3 weeks of penance and a very long lecture about temptation. The Lord's Son, meanwhile, set fire to someone's fence while drunk and got a boys will be boys blessing. Funny how that works. The rules are everywhere, and they shift like mud under your feet. You're told to be humble, but also grateful. Quiet, but also pious. Poor, but also generous. The sermons talk about the meek inheriting the earth. You're still waiting on the paperwork for that. Here's a quirky bit. People sometimes bribe their way into heaven. Not in a cartoonish sack of coins at the pearly gates kind of way, but by buying indulgences. Fancy folks could pay the church to reduce time in purgatory. You can't even pay for cheese. One time, a merchant passed through with a stack of pardons, selling divine forgiveness like bread loaves. You asked if he had one for stealing berries and lying about it. He said that'd be 3 pennies. You had one, and a snail shell. He was not impressed. Back in the village, the bell rings again. Midday now. Time for more work? You stop by the well? Talk with a girl who says she saw the priest sneaking wine from the altar. You both giggle, then both instantly cross yourselves, just in case. Your parents are devout in that tight-lipped, tired way that poor people often are. Your father bows deeply during services. Your mother mutters prayers while kneading bread. Not because she thinks God is listening, but because she hopes he is. God is everywhere. But the nobles act like he lives exclusively in their section of the church. They sit in front, you sit in the back. They get benches, you get splinters. They get buried in the churchyard. You get the muddy plot behind it. There's a weird comfort in the rhythm, though. Ringing bells, candle smoke, echoed hymns. A predictable loop in a life that gives you very few guarantees. But you can't help wondering, if God loves everyone equally, why does he let some people eat pork and have pillows? No one answers that. You walk home after evening prayers. The road is slick. The moon's out. You whisper a blessing toward the woods, not because you think a spirit's listening, but because something probably is. And when you pass the small shrine by the old tree, you toss a pebble into the bowl. For luck, for health, for next year's harvest. You don't even know which saint it's for anymore. Someone said St. Cuthbert. Someone else said, just an old goat ghost. You don't ask questions. Because in the Middle Ages, you don't need to understand faith. You just need to walk alongside it. Like a tired mule you can't outrun. Back in bed, you listen to the wind sighing through the shutters. Your little sister hums a hymn under her breath. Your mother snores softly beside the fire. You close your eyes. You try not to think about sins or sermons or saints with judgmental eyebrows. You dream about clean water and a God who shows up barefoot with a warm bowl of stew and says, "Hey kid, I heard you've had a rough day." It hits you the moment you open the door. The smell. It's not just the usual mix of mud, smoke, and pig breath. This morning's flavor is particularly rich. Part manure, part mold, part whatever died behind the compost heap last week. Welcome to your front yard, the 14th century version of curb appeal. But honestly, you're used to it. You've spent your whole life in this stew of smells. When it rains, and it always rains, it turns the village into a bubbling cauldron of filth. Shoes sink. Rats swim. You once saw a duck get stuck in the outhouse. It looked ashamed. Let's talk hygiene, or rather, the complete and utter lack of it. There are no showers, no toothbrushes, no scented soaps named things like ocean breeze. You have water, you have a cloth, and you have hope. That's it. You wash your face once a week maybe, your hands more often, but only because they keep touching dirt, guts, or mysterious goo stuck to the firewood. Your body? Well, you aim for not itchy, and that's considered a victory. Baths are a group affair, communal, in a wooden tub that smells like wet dog and regret. You heat water over a fire, pour it in slowly, then take turns soaking while trying not to look directly at your neighbor's knees. And yes, you bathe in order of importance. Guess where you land. The water is brown by the time it's your turn. Not sort of brown. Not, maybe it's the lighting. It's brown. But you get in anyway, because it's still warmer than the outside air, and you haven't felt clean since Easter. Soap? Not really a thing. Lye soap exists, made from wood ash and animal fat, but it burns your skin and smells like something that crawled out of the underworld. Some people use it. Most just scrub with sand, cloth, or strong words. And the hair situation? If you're a man, you might keep it short to avoid lice. If you're a woman, you braid it and pray. There's a communal comb passed between households like a sacred relic. You use it once. You never speak of it again. You're not ashamed of the way you smell. Everyone smells. It's democratic. But you do avoid standing downwind of the village blacksmith. He radiates a certain metallic funk, like if fire and sweat had a baby and raised it in a boot. Now for the fun part, the toilet situation. There is no toilet. There is an outhouse. Maybe. If your family is lucky. It's a wooden box with a hole and some unfortunate splinters. It's downwind, always leaning, and often occupied by spiders with questionable morals. Otherwise, you use a bucket, or the bushes, or the stream if you want to double your risk of dysentery and eternal damnation. One of the priests once said, "God watches what you do in the woods." You sincerely hope he doesn't. Human waste gets dumped in pits or flung into the fields. It's fertilizer technically, but more often, it's just something you step in while carrying grain. Here's a fringe tidbit. Some folks used moss as toilet paper. Some used hay. Some just didn't. One brave soul once tried using a rabbit pelt. You never heard from him again. And yet, despite all this, You adapt. You grow up learning to avoid certain puddles. You step carefully around the latrine trench. You tie your tunic high when you go to market, not because it looks good, but because ankle-deep mystery slop is a real threat. Diseases love this place. Dysentery, cholera, skin infections, parasites. Coughing is as common as sneezing. You've seen people blow their noses with their sleeve and then use that same sleeve to stir soup. You still ate the soup. Historians still argue whether medieval people knew their environment was making them sick. Some think peasants believed bad smells caused illness, miasma theory. Which, honestly, isn't too far off, given how often the smelliest places were also the deadliest. No one knows what germs are. You get sick, you blame the weather, or sin, or your neighbor's weird cat. You get better, it's a miracle. You die, God's will. End of story. Sometimes a peddler comes through with remedies, dried herbs, vials of something that smells like fermented sadness. One guy tried to sell garlic soaked in vinegar to prevent bad humors. It didn't work, but at least it cleared your sinuses. There's always someone in the village with a theory. Rub goose grease on your chest. Drink nettle tea. Hang a frog around your neck. You try them all just in case. You once asked if bathing more might help. Your uncle laughed for 5 straight minutes. Then he told you about the noblewoman who bathed 3 times a year. She was considered wildly extravagant, possibly cursed. You've also heard rumors of public bathhouses in cities. Heated ones, with steam and everything. But you don't live in a city. You live in Mudville. Population perpetually damp. You try not to envy the clean. But when you see a traveling noble pass by in a carriage, powdered, perfumed, dressed like a walking curtain, you can't help it. Their hair shines, their hands are soft, they smell like flowers and opportunity. You, meanwhile, smell like onions, goat, and mild disappointment. Still, there's something weirdly beautiful about the dirt. It connects you to the land, to your work, to each other. You've shared soap, spit, steam, and sickness with your entire village. It's a bond, a gross, fungal, deeply human bond. And when the rain comes, again, you tilt your face up, let it wash over you. Just for a moment, it feels like a bath, a gift. You close your eyes, breathe in the petrichor. Try not to step in the pig pen. You hear the news the same way you always do. Someone coughing louder than usual. At first, it's just old Marta, hacking away by the bread oven, waving it off like she always does. It's the flour, she says. Always gets in my lungs. You nod, unconvinced. Then the Reeves' daughter starts coughing too. Then 2 boys from the mill. Then your little sister. You don't panic, yet. But then the baker boards up his door, and the priest cancels mass. And you see a cart, one of those carts, rolling down the road with something lumpy and covered in cloth. Then you panic. Because you've heard stories, everyone has. The Black Death. No one really understands what it is, but you know what it does. It empties villages. It turns healthy people into blotchy, leaking ghosts in a matter of days. It makes priests whisper, and midwives cross themselves, and mothers suddenly hold their children too tight. And now it's here. The rich? They leave. The manor lord packs up his family and rides out before the sun sets. You watch their carriage disappear, kicking up mud like a warning. You don't even know where they're going, just that it's somewhere else. You don't have the luxury of somewhere else. You're too poor for running. You're also too poor for a doctor. Not that it matters. Doctors are just as likely to kill you with their cures, like draining your blood, or forcing you to swallow mercury. One guy in the next village got told to inhale boiled onions. He died holding an onion like a teddy bear. Your village has a wise woman instead. Her name's Tilda. She smells like mushrooms and talks to her cat like it's a doctor. She hands out garlic, chewed bark, and something she calls pestle powder, which smells suspiciously like ground-up beetles, but she means well. And at least she's there. Historians still argue whether the poor had any actual medical understanding during plagues. Some think people just panicked and turned to superstition. Others argue folk medicine sometimes worked better than professional treatments. All you know is that Tilda's beetle powder didn't help your uncle. He was fine one day, a little tired maybe. The next morning, he had black swellings under his arms, boils, buboes, the kind of thing you don't unsee. You stayed away. Everyone did, except your aunt. She sat with him all night, praying. He died before dawn. She died 2 days later. The grave pit grows. You help dig it, because there's no one else. The ground is wet and soft, but digging still takes hours. The smell lingers in your clothes, your hair, your dreams. You don't talk while you work. You just dig, and dig, and dig. At night, the village is silent. Even the dogs don't bark. The church bells ring more often now, but not for mass, for death. Sometimes you hear wailing. Sometimes you don't. Sometimes people just vanish behind shut doors. Later, someone quietly boards the house and moves on. The worst are the babies, small bundles wrapped tight and carried away by pale mothers with empty eyes. You try not to think too hard. You do your chores. You boil your water. You tie rosemary around your neck and hang a clove of garlic over the door. You draw symbols on the walls. Ones Tilda swears keep the plague away. You draw 100 of them if it helped. You sleep curled up in the same straw next to the same people, breathing the same air. Every cough makes your stomach clench. Every sneeze sounds like a countdown. And yet you survive. For now. One day, a stranger comes through, face covered in a long bird-like mask, leather robes, gloves, a wide-brimmed hat. The children call him the Plague Crow. He says nothing, just walks the streets pointing at houses. 1 means burn it. 2 means board it. No one knows who sent him. Later, you learn he's what they call a plague doctor. He thinks bad smells carry disease, so he stuffs his beak mask with flowers and herbs. Honestly, it doesn't help. He still smells like vinegar and death. The days blur. Some mornings, you wake up and forget. Just for a second. You stretch, scratch your arm, look around, then you remember. The silence, the smell, the spaces where people used to be. But life somehow crawls forward. You tend the fire, feed the animals, stir the pot. You help the neighbors who are still standing. You share your garlic and your stories. You joke gently. You laugh when the rooster falls off the fence, even if it's hollow laughter. You survive. And one day, the coughing slows. The cart rolls through less often. People peek out their doors again. The priest rings the bell. And not for a funeral. It's not over. It never really is. But the worst has passed. At least this wave. And you? You're still standing. You've lost family. You've lost friends. You've lost the idea that the world is safe or predictable. But you've gained something too. A strange kind of strength. A sharpened sense of what matters. Bread. Fire. Laughter. A hand on your shoulder when everything feels like it's falling apart. You know now that poverty doesn't protect you, but it prepares you. You've already lived hard, so when the worst came, you knew how to survive it. You don't have a last name. Or if you do, it's not really yours. It's something functional, something descriptive. Maybe you're Tom Miller because your father works the mill. Maybe Agnes Small because you're shorter than the other girls. Maybe Edith Pig's wife. You don't get to choose. Names are for nobles, for property owners, for people with deeds. You're just a body attached to a job. Your name's less identity, more inventory tag. Even your first name isn't unique. There are 4 Johns, 3 Marys, and at least 2 Simons in the village, so you all get unofficial upgrades. Tall John, Sour John, Left Eye Mary, Simon, the one who fell in the duck pond. It works. Kind of. But don't get ideas. Names don't mean power. And power in your world is locked up tighter than the manor pantry. You have no voice, no vote, no influence. If the Lord wants your field for grazing, you move. If the reeve decides you owe an extra chicken this year, you pay. If the bishop demands a tithe when your roof is leaking and your last goat just coughed itself into the afterlife, you give, because you're not a person with rights. You're a resource. Technically, you're free. Sort of. You're not a slave. No chains. But you're not chained either. It's just that your chains are made of obligation and tradition and the relentless weight of being born at the bottom. You can't hunt the deer in the woods. That's poaching. Even if they're literally eating your cabbage. Even if your kids haven't had meat in months. The forest is the Lord's. The fish are the Lord's. The birds in the sky? Probably his too. Remember that pig you've been raising? The one you fed scraps to for a year? When it's finally big enough to slaughter, the Lord gets a cut. Not metaphorically. Literally. One leg. Yours by birth. His by law. Historians still argue whether medieval lords were genuinely paternalistic or just opportunistic. Some think they believed they were protecting you. Others think they just liked your bread. Either way, the power imbalance is baked into your daily life, like stones in the rye loaf. And if you do push back, complain, raise your voice, it doesn't go well. The punishments vary. Maybe a fine, maybe stocks, maybe a public shaming where you stand in the village square while children throw turnips at you and your dignity melts like snow in spring. Once, a man named Hammond argued with the steward. Just argued. He said his grain tally was wrong. The steward didn't like the tone. Hammond spent 3 days tied to the church post, wearing a sign that read liar. He doesn't speak much anymore. You keep your head down. Even in disputes between peasants, the law isn't on your side, or anyone's. Justice isn't about fairness. It's about connections. Landowners know other landowners. Priests know who gives the biggest tithe. The poor? You know how to say, "Yes, my lord," without letting it taste too bitter on your tongue. And if you really mess up, you might get outlawed. That means banishment. Literally kicked out of the village, stripped of any protection, declared fair game. No home, no rights, no help. Anyone can rob you. Anyone can kill you. And no one will lift a finger in protest. You pass a man like that once, wild-eyed, rags for clothes, fingers missing, muttering to himself and chewing bark. You don't make eye contact. You just walk faster. Titles matter. Always. The people with titles wear cloaks. They own horses. They smell like spice and smugness. They get called my lord even when they step on your foot. You, meanwhile, are boy, wench, laborer, or just a vaguely insulting gesture. Your worth is measured in what you can do. Can you carry? Can you dig? Can you birth calves without screaming? Great. You're valuable. Until you're not. Age, injury, illness. All of these can erase you faster than a bad harvest. There's no safety net. No disability pay. No retirement. Just the slow fade into invisibility as people stop calling your name and start calling your home that place where the old one lives. Sometimes you think about leaving, just walking away, heading to the city, finding work in a tavern or under a traveling craftsman. But leaving means abandoning your family, risking being branded a vagabond, possibly dying in a ditch. So you stay. Besides, you're not supposed to dream big. That's dangerous. Hope makes people question things. Better to aim small. Get through the week. Patch the roof. Keep the pig alive. Quirky fact: some peasants staged mock trials for animals. A rooster that crowed at the wrong time, a pig that bit a child. They'd dress the animal up, assign it a lawyer, and then declare it guilty or not. It sounds absurd, like a joke, but maybe it was a way to pretend the world had order. That justice existed somewhere, even if only for chickens. You watch the manor steward pass by on a shiny horse. He doesn't look at you. You nod anyway. Tomorrow you'll owe him 3 bundles of firewood. You haven't cut them yet. You probably won't sleep tonight worrying about it. Because you don't own your time, or your name, or your body, really. You belong to the system, and the system doesn't ask permission. It just takes. It starts before the sun's even up. The rooster crows. The dogs bark. Your joints ache like you've aged 50 years overnight, and you haven't even reached your 12th birthday. You roll off the straw mattress, really more of a matted hay clump with fleas, and land with a grunt. Time to work. Because in your world, rest is a rumor. The poor work, that's the rule. From the moment you can carry a bucket or tie a knot, your life becomes a to-do list that never ends. If you're not working, you'd better be dying. And even then, someone will probably hand you a broom on the way out. Today, you're headed to the fields. The same fields you trudged through yesterday, and the day before, and the week before. You know every rut, every rock, every spot where your boot gets sucked into the mud like the earth itself is trying to claim you. You don't complain, out loud anyway. You grab your tools, a bent scythe, a chipped hoe, and your father's old knife. The blade is dull, but it's better than your hands. Barely. The work begins before the mist has even lifted. The first job? Threshing barley. You swing a flail over your head, again and again, separating grain from husk. It's hypnotic. It's exhausting. It's endless. Every swing sends up clouds of dust and chaff. You breathe it in. You cough it out. Your shirt sticks to your back. Your arms burn. Welcome to your Monday. And your Tuesday. And your Wednesday. You break for water, not because anyone allows it, but because your vision is starting to blur. The jug is warm. You drink anyway. You wipe your mouth on your sleeve, which is also your napkin, towel, and handkerchief. Efficiency. A few fields over, you see someone plowing with oxen. The oxen are lucky. They get breaks, and food, and someone to brush them down at night. You do not. Your stomach grumbles. You ignore it. Lunch will be crusty bread, maybe an onion. If your sister didn't drop it in the fire again. You return to work. This time, it's hauling stones. A new building's going up. A barn, maybe, or a storage shed for tools no one will lend you. The stones are heavy. Your hands blister. Your back screams. But you lift and drag and haul. Because if you stop, the steward notices. And when the steward notices, things get unpleasant. There's no union, no workers' rights, no "can I speak to your manager?" The manager is the Lord, and he's currently off hawking or drinking or commissioning another tapestry of himself, killing something with a sword. And still, you work. Historians still argue whether medieval peasants actually worked all the time or just seasonally. The truth is, it depends. Harvest season. You work until your fingers split. Winter? Slightly less, but you're still chopping wood, feeding animals, fixing that cursed thatch roof that leaks like it's in a competition. Your family owes labor to the manor. It's called corvée. Fancy name, terrible deal. Basically, you work part of the week for free because your house sits on the Lord's land. It's like paying rent, with sweat and occasional blood. Your mother spins wool. Your brother carts manure. Your cousin was sent to help patch the manor roof. He came back with a limp and an exciting new vocabulary of swear words you're definitely not supposed to know. And at the end of it all, your tithes are due. 1/10 of your produce, 1/10 of your income. to the church, because apparently God likes onions and barley. And if it's a bad year, too bad. You pay anyway, even if it means going hungry. Sometimes you dream of saying no, of dropping the hoe, turning your back and walking into the woods like some legendary outlaw. You even made a bow once. It broke, gave you a splinter and a bruised ego. So you keep working. You're not lazy. You're just tired. Bone deep, soul deep tired. The kind that makes you stare at a wall for 20 minutes and call it a break. Your friend Willem once passed out in the fields, just collapsed mid-swing. When he woke up, he apologized to the steward for fainting. You laughed, then cried, then went back to work. Here's a weird fact. Some peasants tried to fake illnesses just to get a day off. They'd rub nettles on their skin to create rashes, or chew certain leaves to fake vomiting. It didn't always work, and the punishment for faking was usually worse than the work. So most people just push through, coughing, limping, groaning. You once saw a man with a broken foot still digging ditches. He used a stick as a crutch, called it his second leg. You called it terrifying. Even the kids work. Small hands for small tasks, weaving, fetching, scaring birds from the crops. Your little sister lost her shoe chasing a goat and just kept going. She's 6. You were proud and horrified. By sunset, your body is buzzing with pain. Your arms are lead. Your fingers twitch. You smell like effort and despair. But you don't go home yet. First, you have to tend the animals, gather firewood, help repair the chicken coop, because one of them got out again. Probably Henrietta. That bird has an escape artist's soul. Only after that do you trudge home. Your feet are numb. Your thoughts are dull. You sit by the fire, eat your lukewarm dinner, and try not to fall asleep face down in the pottage. And then you sleep. Not restfully, not peacefully, just heavily, like your body has to shut down to reboot. Because tomorrow's waiting. Same fields, same tools, same aching rhythm. You're not working to get ahead. You're working to survive, to keep the roof up, the bread baked, the steward quiet. And if you're lucky, maybe you'll live long enough for your kids to do the same. Is it fair? But it's life. And in the Middle Ages, life doesn't ask if you're tired. It just hands you another stone and says, start walking. You're 15, maybe 16, old enough to want things. Not wild things, just simple ones. A smile from that flax-haired girl who works by the well, a piece of bread with honey. A life that isn't assigned to you before you can spell your own name, not that you can spell. But here's the catch. Poor people don't get choices, especially not when it comes to love. The nobles write songs about it. Serenades, poems, sonnets. Like love is some noble pastime, a luxury item to be unwrapped after dinner. For you, it's a risk, a complication, a potential fine. Because if you're born poor in the Middle Ages, marriage isn't a romantic ideal. It's an economic agreement. You marry when and if your family, your lord, and the church say it's time. You don't get a say. You get a dowry negotiation. Your cousin Alice was 14 when she was promised to the Thatcher's son, not because she liked him, not because he had nice eyes or could dance, but because her family owed the Thatcher 2 pigs and a jug of cider. She cried on her wedding night, not because she was sad, because she was terrified. Your friend Toma isn't allowed to marry the girl he likes because she's technically a bondwoman on another manor, different landlord, different rules. He tried anyway. They got caught. She was whipped. He was fined 3 goats and a week of unpaid labor. That was considered merciful. Historians still argue whether peasant marriages were arranged with love in mind or entirely for survival. In practice, they were usually some alchemy of both, if you were lucky. But most of the time, love had to wait until after the chores were done and the debts were paid. You've seen people fall in love, quietly, carefully, side glances across the barley, a smile exchanged while hauling manure. Romance, 14th century style. But acting on it? That's a minefield. First problem, the church. They control marriage. They say when you can marry, who you can marry, and whether you're related enough to need special permission. Spoiler, you usually are. And no, you don't get the permission. Secret weddings were a thing, but dangerous. Public vows without the church's blessing? They can get annulled, and suddenly your kids are illegitimate. A word that somehow falls heavier on the child than the parents. Second problem, the Lord. If you're a villain, a tenant tied to land, you technically need your Lord's permission to marry someone outside the manor. Why? Because your body is part of the estate's value. Your children are future workers. The Lord doesn't want to lose assets. So what do? You sneak around. You meet behind the tannery, which smells so bad that no one else dares to come near. You pass each other bread crusts and smile like it's treasure. You hold hands once in a storm, and the memory keeps you warm for weeks. You plan a future together. Not a castle, not a poem, just a dry roof, a shared pig, maybe a patch of land. But even if you get to marry, officially with the priest and everything, it's not exactly a fairy tale. There's no cake, no music, no gold rings, maybe a garland of flowers if someone's feeling generous. And instead of a honeymoon, you get a week of heavy lifting and slightly less insulting gossip. Your house is a hut, your bed is straw, your privacy is a curtain that flaps every time the wind sneezes. But somehow, you still find comfort in each other. In the way she stirs the pottage just right, in the way you patch the thatch to stop her bed from dripping, in the way you laugh together when the goat eats your only pair of socks. Children follow? Fast, too fast, maybe. And now your time isn't your own anymore. You're still working the fields, still owing labor, still paying tithes. But now there's a baby wailing when you come home, and you haven't slept in 3 days, and your wife is pale and tired and hasn't eaten a full meal since Candlemas. You try your best, but your best is limited by what you have, and what you have is not much. You share clothes, you share chores, you share worries. Every sickness is a gamble, every winter a test, every new mouth a blessing and a burden. You love your family. You do. But sometimes you lie awake and wish, just once, you could choose something for yourself. Here's a quirky fact. In some villages, lovers carved their initials into trees, or passed each other ribbons soaked in herbs. Some even whispered vows in fields under full moons, believing that nature would bless what the church could not. Were these unions legal? Were they sacred? Maybe. At least to the people who had nothing else. You remember once watching a noblewoman ride past on a white horse. She wore a dress the color of sunrise and laughed at something the knight beside her said. You stood in the mud, holding a spade, and felt something sharp and hollow in your chest. Not jealousy, just a realization. She'll marry for land. You'll marry for survival. She'll get silk, you'll get fleas. But still, you love. Not the way the ballads say, not loudly, but deeply. Through shared bread, through cold nights, through burying your first child and holding each other until the sobs stop. Because even the poor have hearts. They just don't get to use them freely. So you hold your wife's hand, rough against rough, and say nothing. Because in this life, love is a whisper between chores, a risk between debts, a fragile, stubborn act of rebellion in a world that keeps trying to tell you you're not allowed to want anything. It only takes one spark, one tiny ember from an unattended fire pit, one flicked coal from an oven with a cracked door, one lightning strike on a dry thatch roof, and suddenly, your village is on fire. There are no fire brigades, no hydrants, no brave souls in helmets riding in with hoses and hero music. There's just you, a bucket, and the sheer panic of watching everything you own crackle into ash. Your house, like most in the village, is built from timber, straw, and hope. The walls are wood. The roof is thatch. The floor is dirt. The insulation? Regret. And maybe a few moldy rags stuffed into the cracks. It's warm in winter. It's cheap to fix. It's also a disaster waiting to happen. This morning, you wake to shouts, the kind that cut through your bones. Fire! You bolt up. The air is already thick with smoke. The dog's howling. Your little brother is coughing. Your mother's yelling something about the stew pot. You grab a cloak, then a bucket, then the door latch. You burst outside, and the sky is orange. The flames are coming from 2 houses over. Old Widow Alfreda's place. You can see her barefoot in the mud, waving a rag at the smoke like it's offended her personally. People are already forming a line. Buckets pass hand to hand, wooden, warped, leaking. But it's all you've got. Water sloshes, people yell, children cry. You join in. Because if the fire spreads, and it always spreads, you lose everything. You're not just fighting for a roof. You're fighting for your food, your blankets, your tools, your drying herbs, your winter firewood, your stored grain. Every bucket you throw is a scream against helplessness. But it's not enough. The wind picks up. The fire jumps. Thatch lights up like it wants to burn. Within an hour, 3 houses are gone. Just black stumps and steaming rubble. Yours is still standing, for now. You soak the walls. You throw water on the roof. You pray to St. Florian, even though you're not sure if he covers poor people, or fire, or both. By nightfall, the fire is out. Not defeated, just tired, like the rest of you. You sit in the mud, smoke-streaked and hollow. Your tunic is singed. Your eyebrows feel crispy. Someone hands you a hunk of bread. It tastes like ashes. And then the counting begins. Who lost what? Who needs shelter? Who's injured? Who didn't make it? Because fires kill, not just by flame, but by what they take away after. No home means no place to sleep, cook, store grain. No tools means no work. No pots, no bowls, no food. Everything you own fits in a cloth bundle now, and that bundle smells like soot and grief. You and your family didn't lose everything, just almost everything. The roof still stands, but it's got holes. The hearth is cracked. The pig panicked and ran off. Again. You suspect it's hiding in the old well? It's done it before. Your neighbor wasn't so lucky. Their house is gone. They're staying with you tonight, which means 12 people in a 1-room hut, already holding 7. Welcome to post-fire hospitality. You give up your corner, your blanket, your last clean sock, not because you want to, but because that's the law of the poor. You help, or one day you won't be helped. Historians still argue how often fires devastated entire communities. Some records suggest every 10 or 20 years, a village would suffer a fire that wiped out a third or more of its homes. But for the poor, even a small fire feels apocalyptic. You don't have savings. You don't have a second set of dishes. You don't have Plan B. What you do have is other poor people, and that means something. Everyone pitches in. The men gather timber. The women mend clothes. The children carry mud to patch walls. Someone donates a pot. Someone else donates a hen. Not out of abundance, but out of necessity. If one of you sinks, you all start to float lower. You remember a story the priest told once about how fire purifies, how destruction can make way for grace. You didn't buy it then. You really don't buy it now. But you do rebuild. Slowly. Brick by salvaged brick. Roof patch by roof patch. You sleep under leaks. You eat off splintered boards. But you keep going. Because if you don't, the cold comes next. Winter waits like a wolf outside your door. And it doesn't care how tragic your fire was. If your roof isn't fixed and your grain isn't stored, You freeze, or starve, or both. So you work double. You cut wood until your hands blister. You patch the walls with mud and straw. You help the neighbor kids gather thatch, even though they keep fighting over who gets the longest stalk. And at night, you sit by the fire, carefully this time, always carefully, and stare into the flickering light like it owes you something. You can't stop the fire from coming, but you can make it work for you now. Cook your food, warm your hands, boil your beer. Control. It's an illusion, maybe, but in a world that keeps reminding you how little you have, even the illusion is comforting. The chicken thief gets away. You watch him go, legs pumping, sack swinging, feathers puffing through the seams. It's early morning, and he's already halfway down the road before anyone can even finish shouting, "Stop that man." But here's the thing. He's not your chicken. You don't own chickens. You own a bucket with a hole in it and an onion with a bruise shaped like France. So you just stand there watching the chase, chewing a crust of stale bread and thinking, well, at least someone's eating well today. 10 minutes later, the reeve shows up. Not because of the thief, he's long gone, but because someone has to be blamed. And if you're poor and nearby, you're already a suspect. You see anything? He barks. You shake your head. He narrows his eyes. You sure? You nod, bread halfway to your mouth. You always this quiet? You pause, swallow. Mostly when I'm eating. He doesn't laugh. He never laughs. He scribbles something on his wax tablet, glares a bit more, then trudges off, muttering about vagrants and lazy folk. You finish your bread. Welcome to Law and Order, Medieval Peasant Edition. If you're poor, the law isn't something that protects you. It's something that watches you. Closely. Suspiciously. Like a cat that's seen you drop the butter twice and no longer trusts your intentions. There are laws, technically. Hundreds of them. Don't steal. Don't poach. Don't gamble on church steps. Don't speak against the king. Don't speak too loudly near the reeve. Don't wear clothes above your station. Seriously, sumptuary laws were a thing. You could get fined for looking too fancy. Don't fish in the wrong stream. Don't breathe funny during a saint's procession. You get the idea. But here's the twist. The law only works if you can afford to use it. Your neighbor's pig wandered into your garden and trampled your beans? Good luck getting compensation. Unless you want to walk 3 villages over, plead your case to a bailiff who already owes your neighbor's cousin a favor and pay a filing fee in barley you don't have. But if you take something, like, say, a turnip during a famine, the law suddenly moves very quickly. Stocks, fines, whippings, humiliation, the full show. Historians still debate how harsh medieval justice really was. Some say the records exaggerate to scare people. Others argue that fear was the point. You've seen enough to believe both. There's a reason the pillory is in the center of the village, right next to the well, so everyone has to pass it, so everyone remembers what happens to people who step out of line. You remember when young Bertle got caught borrowing bread from the manor kitchen? It wasn't much, just 1 small loaf. He said he hadn't eaten in 3 days. They tied him to the stocks for 2, in winter. The local kids threw snowballs. One of them put a frog down his shirt. The reeve watched the whole thing, chewing an apple. When they let Bertle out, he limped for weeks and never looked anyone in the eye again. You tell yourself you'll never end up in the stocks, but deep down, you know it's not really up to you. All it takes is being in the wrong place with the wrong face when something goes missing. You've heard of trials too, usually held in the manor court, a room with big chairs, bored lords, and records no one checks twice. Sometimes there's a jury, sometimes just a steward with a hangover and a grudge. And if things get really serious, there's trial by ordeal. Yes, ordeal, as in, let's see if God thinks you're guilty. Walk across hot irons, hold a red-hot poker, stick your hand in boiling water. If you heal quickly, you're innocent. If you blister or scream or faint, you're guilty. It's justice, medieval style, terrifying, arbitrary, and very, very flammable. Quirky historical tidbit. There was once a trial by cheese. For monks, mostly. They had to pray over a slice of blessed cheese and then eat it. If they choked or vomited, it meant they were lying. You wonder if that would work on your uncle. He chokes on everything. But justice isn't just about punishment. It's about who gets punished. The Baron's son set fire to a hay cart last year, called it an accident. The hay cart belonged to the Reeves' cousin, who said nothing and smiled like a man thinking about all the free ale he's about to get. The Baron's son was told to apologize. He didn't. The Reeves still got the ale. The miller, meanwhile, charged extra to grind your grain. You couldn't prove it. You tried. The steward said it was within acceptable ranges. You said the only thing ranging was your anger. Then you remembered your place and shut your mouth. So you learn to navigate. You keep your head down. You nod when spoken to. You help neighbors, because if someone does steal your chicken, you'll need those same neighbors to help you track it, not the law. You settle disputes quietly. You trade favors. You whisper your frustrations where the wind can't carry them. And when the Reeve walks by, you smile. Not because you want to, but because your smile is the only shield you've got. One time you saw a nobleman fall off his horse in a puddle. You laughed. Out loud. Just once. The silence that followed was colder than snow. No one reported you, but for a week, the miller forgot to grind your flour. The baker lost your order, and the priest gave you a sermon about humility so long your knees fell asleep. So now you laugh in private. The next day, the Reeve posts a notice. Someone's been stealing eggs. There's a fine. No suspects yet? You look over at the dog. He burps. You sigh and go back to work. Because in your world, justice is a ladder, and the poor are always at the bottom. The grain runs out in May. It always does. That's the cruel joke of the peasant calendar. Spring isn't the season of plenty. It's the season of nothing left. You made it through winter, but just barely. And now your food stores are down to a sack of cracked barley, a pickled beet with personality, and whatever's sprouting suspiciously in the back of the root cellar. You chew slowly, hoping your stomach won't notice. The fields are greening up. Sure, but the harvest's still months away. That means everything you eat now has to come from what you saved last year, or what you can forage, or what you can steal without getting caught. Which is why people get tense in spring. Faces thin, eyes dart, voices rise. Even the animals start acting nervous. And when the baker raises his prices by half, everyone notices. You hear it first at the well. They say he's using more bran, less wheat. He's hoarding it for the steward's feast. My cousin swears she saw him bearing sacks behind the mill. Most of it's nonsense, but that doesn't stop the murmurs from swelling. Then one afternoon, a woman gets caught taking 2 loaves she couldn't afford. She begs, cries, offers her shawl, her boots, anything. The baker refuses, says if he gives in, the whole village will ransack the oven. Order, he says, must be maintained. That night, someone breaks his window. The next morning, the riot begins. Not all at once, more like a slow boil. First a crowd, then a shove, then a cry, then someone throws an onion, possibly yours. Then someone else throws a stone. The baker screams. The steward arrives. The crowd closes in. And from the top of the manor, they pour it. Boiling oil. You don't see it coming. No one does. 1 second, you're standing near the edge of the crowd, trying to decide if joining in will get you bread or jail. The next second, someone screams. And there's smoke. Real, thick, stinging smoke. And heat. So much heat. You fall back, hit the dirt, Cough, crawl. The air smells like burning cloth and roasted fear. They don't pour much, just enough. Enough to scatter the crowd, enough to make a point, enough to remind everyone that the manor sits above you, literally and otherwise. Historians still argue how often boiling oil was really used on rioters. Some say it was rare, too expensive. Others say it was exaggerated. But you've seen enough kitchen pots to know that a ladle of grease thrown from high enough does the job. The crowd disperses. No one talks about it later, not directly. You just see the bandages, the limps, the tight, silent mouths chewing barley flatbread with their eyes down. The baker starts sleeping with a knife beside his bed. And the bread still costs too much. You go back to scavenging. Nettles, mostly. Wild greens. Bitter roots that make your tongue numb. You ask Tilda, the wise woman, if you can eat moss. She says no, then mutters that she might have to anyway. You catch a squirrel once. It's skinny, mean, and barely meat, but you roast it on a stick like a king. It's the first protein you've had in a month. You don't even mind the fur. Your friend tries to catch a pigeon, misses, breaks his toe. Everyone laughs, then everyone's quiet again. You start chewing more slowly, drinking more water, pretending that full is a feeling you can fake. Quirky historical fact. Some medieval peasants ate clay when desperate. Actual clay, mixed with bits of grass or flour to form what they called hunger cakes. You try to imagine the recipe. You fail. Your stomach cramps, not because of illness, just emptiness. And then the rumors start. Another village rioted, burned the Lord's granary, got whipped for it. The priest says it was God's punishment. The baker says it was poor planning. You say nothing. Your mouth is busy trying to turn boiled nettles into calories. One morning, a cart arrives from the manor. It's filled with grain. Not much, but enough for rations. The steward reads out the rules. 3 cups per household. No refills, no trades, no complaints. You take your cup. Say thank you. Even though it's the manor's taxed grain being returned to you like a gift. That night, your mother mixes it with water, onions, and silence. You eat it like it's treasure. You don't talk while you eat. No one does. There's still smoke on your tunic from the riot. And you still dream about the smell of that roasted squirrel. The next morning, the sky is clear. The fields are green. The priest says it's a sign of blessing. The steward says the new harvest looks promising. You say nothing. But you watch the horizon. Watch the wind blow over the wheat. Watch the manor gates close at dusk. You're tired, thin, still sore from the scuffle near the oven. But you're still standing. And you know now, when the food runs out, the fear comes next. And the fire. You wake up shivering. Not from a dream, not from fear, just cold. Real creeping, teeth-chattering cold. The kind that slides into your bones before you've even opened your eyes. The kind that makes your breath fog above you like a ghost whispering, "Good luck surviving." Winter has arrived. And if you were born poor in the Middle Ages, winter isn't a season. It's a threat. You fumble for the blanket, which is really just a piece of old wool patched so many times it looks like a map of your regrets. Someone's already stolen the warm corner? Probably your brother. Or the dog. You can't even be mad. Survival is first come, first huddled. You sit up and everything aches. Not in a dramatic night-in-battle way. Just in the quiet, nagging creak of a body that sleeps on straw, hauls water, and breathes in smoke all day. You were 15 last week. You feel 70. Your nose is red. Your hands are cracked. Your toes are somewhere, but you're not convinced they still work. You wiggle them to check. Nope. Might as well have blocks of wood down there. You shuffle to the fire. Or where the fire was. Just glowing embers now. You add some twigs. A log. Whisper encouragement. The fire coughs once, then sighs and decides it'll think about it. Everything smells like damp smoke, wet wool, and cabbage. Always cabbage. Breakfast is cabbage soup. Again, with a side of cold air and existential dread. Winter strips everything bare. The trees, the land, you. There's no growing, no harvesting, no foraging, just rationing what you've stored and praying it lasts. It never lasts. You spend your days patching, clothes, roof, hopes. The thatch drips. The wind whistles through the walls. The pig pen collapsed last week under the weight of snow, and the pig is now living in the house. He snores. You chop wood until your hands bleed. You carry water until your back begs for mercy. You dry your socks by the fire, even though you know they'll still be damp when you put them on. Everything is always a little damp. Your cloak doesn't cover your knees. Your boots don't cover your toes. Your hat is just a scarf you wrapped creatively and called fashion. Quirky historical tidbit? Some peasants stuffed straw in their clothes for insulation. You tried that once, ended up itchy and chased by a goose who thought you were nesting. Never again. You can't remember what warmth feels like. Not real warmth. Just the teasing flicker of firelight and body heat shared out of necessity, not comfort. The animals huddle too. Chickens under the bench, dog near the hearth, pig by the door. Everyone shares everything. Heat, space, fleas. And then there's the coughing. It always starts with one person, a little tickle. Then it spreads. Through the house, through the village, through the winter air like a whispered curse. This time it's your sister. She's small, quiet, and sounds like she's been gargling gravel. You make her tea, nettle maybe, or some herb. Tilda swears wards off winter ghosts. You're not convinced, but the steam is nice. There's no doctor, no medicine, just rest, soup, prayers, and the hope that the fever breaks before she does. Sometimes it doesn't. Historians still argue whether most peasant children survived their first winters. Some think half didn't make it past age 5. Others argue the poor were tougher, more resilient. Either way, you know the truth by heart. Every winter takes someone. The priest says this cold is a test of faith. That hunger makes the soul humble. You want to ask if God's ever tried living on turnip water and boiled twigs, but you keep your mouth shut. Your soul might be humble, but your stomach is getting angry. You lose weight. Fast. Your belt has new notches. Your cheeks have new shadows. Even your dog looks at you like, buddy, if you go, I'm eating your share of the soup. You laugh, then cough, then laugh again. Because if you don't laugh, you'll crack. The days are short. The nights are long. You lose track of time. Was that Tuesday? Or Candlemas? Does it matter? You pass the time mending things, tending to embers, carving small things out of wood. Not because they're useful, but because your hands need something to do. Your mind needs something to hold on to besides the cold. Sometimes you visit neighbors, swap stories, sit close by the fire. Pretend you're warmer than you are. Share bread crusts and rumors. One woman swears she saw a star fall from the sky last night. You all agree that must mean something good. Maybe spring, maybe less cabbage. Once there's a knock at the door, a traveler. He looks half dead. You bring him in anyway. Feed him soup. Let him dry his clothes by the fire. He sleeps. You don't. But in the morning, he's gone. So is your knife, and one of the better blankets. You say nothing. You just tighten your belt and start the fire again. Because winter takes things, people, food, trust. But it gives you one thing in return, the chance to endure. And you do. You watch the icicles drip, the snow melt, the ground soften. You see a crocus push through the slush one morning and feel something dangerous in your chest. Hope. You survived. And in the Middle Ages, that's not just a victory. It's a miracle. Your back aches before you even get out of bed. If you can call it a bed. It's straw in a wooden frame that creaks when you breathe too hard, and you share it with a blanket that smells like old stew and foot. You sit up, groan, stretch, and your spine responds with a crunch like stepping on old bread. You're not old. Not really. You're 40. But in the Middle Ages, 40 is old. You've survived child fevers, bad harvests, and whatever that thing was that lived under the floorboards last winter. You've outlived a lot of people you loved. You've also outlived most of your teeth. They started falling out years ago, one after a particularly crunchy nut. Another got yanked out with a string and a prayer. The rest just sort of gave up. You chew on one side now. You don't eat apples. You sip pottage. Your knees pop when you walk. Your shoulders hurt when you don't walk. You can't see quite as well in the dark. And let's not even talk about your bladder. You hobble to the door, open it with stiff fingers, and step out into another gray, chilly morning. The pig snorts hello. The dog limps up. Everyone's falling apart, but still showing up, like peasants do. You've been working every day since you were 7, maybe 6. No weekends, no retirement plan, just endless chores, endless seasons, endless maybe next years. Historians still argue whether most medieval peasants really died young. Records are fuzzy. The nobility had scribes, you had gossip. But one thing is clear. If you made it to 40, you were either tough, lucky, or slightly too stubborn to die. You watch your son lift a bucket and remember when you could do that without wincing. He's strong, quiet, smells like sweat and soot. You're proud of him. Not that you say it. This isn't a time for soft words. You spend the morning patching the roof with him. Again. Every spring the thatch shifts, leaks, caves. Every spring you climb up and fix it, pretending your hands aren't going numb from the cold. This time, he does most of the work. You supervise, which means squinting at him from a stool and saying, "Not like that," until he figures it out anyway. Later, you head to the fields. You don't plow anymore. Not well, anyway. But you can still rake, still sow, still shout at geese like a professional. A neighbor stops by. Marta. She's about your age. She's wearing 5 layers, none of them clean, and holding a basket of radishes that look like they've seen war. "Back still bad?" she asks. You nod. "Mine too." You both stand there for a moment, nodding in the language of the chronically sore. In the evening, you sit by the fire. Your wife knits. Badly. The needle clicks are off rhythm, and the sock she's making might actually be a hat. You don't say anything. You're just happy she's still here. You think about your friends. How many are gone? Fell from ladders? Got kicked by cows, slipped into the river and didn't come back. One just stopped waking up. No cause. No warning. Just silence. A few still hang on like you. Worn down but stubborn. One of them, Gerwin, swears he saw death once. Says he looked like a merchant. Black hood, scales, no eyes. You said Gerwin needed less mead, but part of you believes him. Because when you're poor in the Middle Ages, death isn't a stranger. He's just another neighbor. Shows up uninvited, takes what he wants, leaves the rest. Still, you endure. You've learned how to ignore pain, how to keep working through fog and frost and fatigue. You've trained yourself to bend, not break, mostly. Quirky bit. Some peasants carried talismans to ward off old age. Little bones, stitched charms, herbal pouches. You tried one once. A piece of leather with a saint's name burned into it. Didn't help your back, but the dog stopped biting you for a week. You don't expect comfort, but some nights, if the fire holds and your feet don't throb too loudly, you feel something close to peace. You think of the time you danced at the harvest feast, your wife laughing, spinning, cheeks red from cider. The music was bad, the bread was worse, but you remember feeling alive, really, joyfully, messily alive. And now, you're still here. The younger folk ask you for advice sometimes. You pretend to know things. Mostly, you just say, keep your boots dry and don't marry anyone who cries when they butcher chickens. Solid wisdom. The priest says you're blessed, that every year is a gift. You're not sure if that's true, but you do feel grateful. Not for the suffering, but for the fact that you're still standing in spite of it. At night, you sit on your stool, sip your soup, and watch the fire. You stretch your hands toward the warmth and whisper thanks. Not because it's enough, but because it's something. You wake up with a fever and a ringing in your ears. You've had worse. At least you think you have. You've also had better. You reach for your water jug and knock it over. Empty. Your joints throb. Your head feels like it's filled with bees. You stand up and the room tilts. You sit right back down. You're sick. Congratulations. And since you're poor and it's the Middle Ages, here are your options. Get better. Die. Ask Tilda, the wise woman, to tie a frog to your wrist and chant. That's about it. There are no doctors in your village. There are leeches, sure, but not in the fun medieval meme way. Real leeches. In a real pot. And if you're lucky, someone with slightly cleaner hands will stick them to your neck and mutter something about balancing your humors. See, you don't have germs in this world. You have humors. Blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile. Everything wrong with you is because one of these is out of balance. Coughing blood? Too much blood. Headaches? Probably phlegm. Sad for no reason? Definitely black bile, or demons, or your mother-in-law. You've got a little of everything, judging by how you feel. Tilda arrives after your cousin fetches her with the promise of a turnip. She smells like garlic and mysterious ointment. Her sleeves are full of herbs, her breath full of conviction. She presses a hand to your forehead. She says, like she's checking bread dough for doneness. Then she gets to work. First, she smears something on your chest. It smells like mustard and damp socks. Then she ties a cloth around your head and hangs a pouch of dried chamomile above your bed. You're not allowed to touch it, speak while lying under it, or dream about snakes for 3 days. You agree to everything. Then she feeds you a tea that tastes like boiled regret and says to rest. Which you do, sort of. But it's hard to rest when the roof drips and your siblings are arguing over who sat on the cat. Again, there's no such thing as a sick day. But you're too woozy to work, so the chores get split. Your cousin takes the pigs. Your son handles the water. Your wife sighs so hard it sounds like a prayer. You sleep fitfully. You sweat through your clothes. You dream about bread that talks. You wake up confused and thirsty. The priest comes by, not because he's worried, just checking. He gives you a look that says, make peace with God. And also, I heard you missed church last week. He blesses you. You think. Then he offers to read you a verse, in Latin. You fall asleep halfway through it. He takes that as a sign of spiritual surrender. Historians still argue whether medieval peasants truly believed in the medical treatments available to them. Some say yes, faith was survival. Others think people knew it was all guesswork, but did it anyway because, well, what else was there? You think it's a bit of both. You remember when your brother tried bleeding himself to treat a fever, cut his arm with a kitchen knife, fainted. Tilda scolded him for wasting good blood. Or when Old Wolf claimed he'd cured his cough by burying a dead mole under his bed. He still coughed. The smell didn't help. Then there are the cures passed down through generations. Rub butter on your forehead, swallow a spider, boil dandelions and gargle the water. Sleep under the moon with a coin on your chest. You've tried worse. Your favorite? The old story that says you can cure a fever by whispering your name backward into a well at midnight. You tried it once, got chased by a bat, still had the fever, Never trusted wells after that. You do start to feel better. A little. Maybe it was the tea. Maybe it was the rest. Maybe it was your body saying, "Fine, I'll keep going," but only because no one else here knows how to milk the goat. You still feel like someone sandpapered your soul, but at least you can sit up without the world spinning like a drunk friar. Tilda checks on you again. "You'll live," she declares. Then she asks about that turnip. You give her 2. She winks and leaves. Your wife changes your bed straw. Your cousin makes soup. Your dog licks your foot and looks vaguely disappointed that you didn't die and leave your dinner behind. That night, you sit by the fire, wrapped in all your warmest layers, sipping broth and listening to your family talk. The room is cramped, loud, and smells like smoke and socks. You smile. Because here's the truth. In the Middle Ages, being poor meant you didn't get comfort. You didn't get security. But sometimes, if you were lucky, you got care. Not from the system, not from science, from each other. And in this cold, brutal frog charm world, that's medicine enough. You're a woman. That already sets the rules. Not that you were asked. You were just born. Tiny, shrieking, squirming. And someone said, "Another girl," and sighed like they'd been handed a cracked bucket. From that moment on, your life was already shaped. Triple the rules, half the bread. You learn early what's expected. Quiet voice, steady hands, always be useful. You help your mother, then your aunt, then the neighbor who needs her laundry done. You carry babies before you know how babies happen. You scrub floors that never stay clean. You spin wool until your fingers bleed, and no one calls it work. They call it what girls do. There's no schooling. That's for boys. And only the rich ones. If you're lucky, you learn your prayers, your letters, maybe your numbers. Just enough to count chickens and curses. But mostly you learn with your body. How to knead dough, how to patch clothes, how to haul water while keeping your skirt clean, impossible. How to slaughter a chicken without flinching. And later, how to give birth without dying. The rules are everywhere like dust. You wear your hair covered, your shoulders down, your mouth closed. If you laugh too loudly, someone frowns. If you walk too fast, someone stares. If you dare to have opinions, someone says, "Hush." You hush. You marry young. 14, maybe 15. The man's not cruel, just distant. He smells like fields and beer and expectations. You didn't choose him. Your father and the Reeve made that decision over a handshake and 3 sacks of barley. You do your best. Keep the fire going. Birth 2 children in 3 years. 1 lives, 1 doesn't. No one asks how you feel. There isn't a word for how you feel. Historians still debate whether peasant women had any real agency in the Middle Ages. Some say they did. Informally, behind closed doors, within households. Others argue their lives were tightly controlled, with every decision shaped by fathers, husbands, priests. You'd say, both. You bend where you must, and push where you can. Because despite it all, you do shape things. Quietly. You decide when the bread is ready, when the healing tea is strong enough, when the children need scolding or silence. You mend the family's clothes with invisible thread. You are the one who knows exactly how long a sack of grain will last in a bad winter. You're not seen, but without you, nothing works. You carry everything, literally and otherwise. Water, firewood, the baby, the guilt when the stew isn't enough, the responsibility when someone gets sick, the stories passed down in whispers about which plants cure cramps and which ones end a pregnancy. You never admit to knowing that last one, but you do. Your body is not your own. It belongs to the field, the kitchen, the cradle, and occasionally your husband, whether you're ready or not. Sex isn't romantic. It's expected. It's rarely discussed. And it comes with consequences. You pray after every time, even if you're not sure who's listening. Pregnancy is a gamble. Childbirth? A coin toss. You've helped in 3 births this year. 1 mother died. 1 baby didn't cry. The 3rd? Miracle. Both lived. The whole village talked about it like it was a harvest omen. You still dream, sometimes, of wearing shoes that aren't someone else's, of walking to market alone, of singing in the field without someone yelling that you're disturbing the cows. You dream of choice. You love your children. You love the way your daughter sleeps with her fists clenched. You love the way your son wrinkles his nose when he smells turnips. You love your husband in your own way. He's not cruel, just tired, like you. You talk quietly by the fire when the children sleep. You share the last of the broth. You rub his back when he coughs. He thanks you with a nod, then returns to silence. That's the most affection anyone shows around here. A nod, a glance, a longer pause. Quirky fact, some peasant women used amulets to protect themselves during childbirth. Tiny tokens tied to their bedposts or worn on string around their necks. You keep one in a pouch. It's made of bone and string. Tilda gave it to you and said, "It's silly." But she handed it over like it mattered. Sometimes you hum while you work. Old songs. Ones your mother sang while hanging laundry. You don't even know the words anymore. Just the rhythm, like wind through wheat. You grow older. Lines around your eyes, strength in your arms, wisdom in your silences. When another girl is born to the neighbor, you help wash her, wrap her, whisper in her tiny wrinkled ear. Be clever, be kind, hide your sharpness like a needle in wool. You look at her and hope. Hope that she'll have it a little easier. Or if not easier, then different. You put her in her mother's arms and return to your fire. Because dinner isn't going to cook itself. The Baron's hunting party rides through the village again. Trumpets, cloaks, horses with manes braided better than any peasant child's hair. They laugh, loudly, carelessly. One of them tosses an apple core into a mud puddle, another accidentally. Maybe rides through someone's drying laundry. No one says anything. Because when you're poor, and they're rich, and this is medieval Europe, silence is safer than justice. You keep your eyes down, keep your hands busy, keep your voice low, because you've seen what happens when someone poor tries to point out a problem. It doesn't go well. Take Willem, the smith's cousin. He caught the Reeves' nephew stealing bread and dared to say something. A few days later, his roof collapsed, not because of bad thatch, because someone took the supporting beam in the night. When Willem complained, the steward said, "Next time, keep your mouth shut and your house standing." The lesson stuck. There's a rule here, though no one says it out loud. Crime is a matter of class. If you take a rabbit from the Lord's forest, that's poaching. Could get you fined, whipped, or worse. If the Lord takes your daughter's wages, your sheep, or your house, that's feudal privilege. Guess which one gets punished? Historians still argue whether medieval justice was always tilted toward the rich. Some say village communities kept each other in check. Others argue that power meant immunity. You say, just watch the miller. Everyone knows he skims grain from the sacks. Everyone knows he uses false weights, but no one stops him. Because the miller pays rent to the steward, and the steward answers to the baron, and you answer to hunger. So the miller gets away with it. Same with the tanner who dumps his waste upstream. Same with the scribe who overcharges for reading contracts. Same with the noble's son who borrows a cart and returns it broken, then says he's doing you a favor by not charging you for the wheel. You grit your teeth. One time you see a noble knock over a market stall. A woman cries out. He tosses her a coin like it's mercy. She scrambles in the mud to pick it up. You feel something sharp rise in your chest. Rage, maybe. Or just tiredness wearing a new face. You don't act on it. Of course not. You have a family to feed. But that doesn't mean you forget. Sometimes you imagine justice. Not the real kind. The imagined kind. Where the Baron has to carry your water buckets for a week. Where the steward has to sleep on straw. Where the reeve has to answer questions instead of asking them. You smile at the thought, then get back to weeding. Because weeds don't care about fairness. They grow anyway. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some villages had charivari, a kind of noisy protest parade used to shame wrongdoers. Pots banged, songs sung, people mocked loudly, sometimes anonymously. It was the only way to call out injustice without pointing fingers directly. You once joined one. A man hit his wife too many times. The village gathered, banged spoons on pans, danced through the street wearing his boots on their hands. It was petty. It was chaotic. It worked. He didn't do it again. But that kind of justice only works if the offender is one of you. If they're rich, titled, armored, they sleep through your noise behind thick walls and thicker coin purses. Still, you find small ways to fight back. You bake your bread without taking it to the Lord's oven, illegally. You gather firewood from the forbidden forest after dusk. You share extra grain with a neighbor and swear, "This is all I have," when the tithe collector comes sniffing. You joke behind closed doors. You call the Baron's horse Buttercup because he once fell off it. You say the reeve smells like boiled turnip and bad choices. You laugh quietly, carefully, but you laugh. Because laughter is power when you have nothing else. Sometimes justice comes the old-fashioned way. Like when the noble's son fell into the pig pen. No one pushed him. That's important. He just slipped into 4 inches of mud and 2 inches of something less pleasant. He screamed. The pigs were unimpressed. The whole village definitely didn't cheer. Not out loud. But the next morning, the steward was unusually polite. That night, you sit by the fire and think about crime. You've never stolen anything. Not really. But you've borrowed without asking. You've undercounted. You've looked the other way. And you've started to think maybe the real crime isn't stealing food. Maybe the real crime is being born poor and being told to be grateful for it. So tomorrow, when the steward asks why your tithe is light, you'll bow. You'll nod. You'll say, "Sorry, sir. Must have been a poor harvest." Then you'll go home, slice the hidden bread, share it with your family, and sleep better than the Baron ever will. You owe everyone something. The church, the manor, the miller, the reeve, the guy who owns the only axe that isn't cracked. Even the pig looks at you like you're behind on a debt. Because in the Middle Ages, being poor isn't just about having nothing. It's about owing everything. You wake up and remember you have a tax due. Not money. You never see coins. You deal in barley, wool, eggs, firewood, and the occasional favor. But someone somewhere always wants a piece of whatever you don't have enough of. Today, it's the tithe. 10% of everything. That's the church's cut. Because apparently, God needs barley, and chickens, and half your only decent cabbage. You trudge to the church storehouse with a basket that should feed your family for 2 more days. The priest thanks you with the same expression he uses when someone sneezes. He says it's a blessed duty. You say nothing. You just try not to glare at the tapestry behind him that probably cost more than your house. The steward wants his cut too. A portion of the grain you just harvested, the fleece from your sheep, the best eggs. If you complain, he reminds you that you're on his land, using his fields and his son probably. So you hand it over. Then the miller takes his share when you try to grind what little grain you have left. Supposedly a customary portion, though it keeps getting more customary every season. Historians still argue about how heavily peasants were taxed. Some say it wasn't that bad. It just felt bad because life was hard. Others say it was essentially economic strangulation with a friendly smirk. You say they always want more when you have less. And it's not just the taxes. There are fees. You want to marry? That's a fee. Use the communal oven? Fee. Cross the bridge? Fee. Pick acorns in the woods that aren't even being used? Fee. Probably for disturbing the squirrels. And you can't just not pay, because fees, taxes, and tithes are like weeds. They grow back stronger if you ignore them. Miss one, and suddenly you owe double. Miss two, and someone's nailing a notice to your door. Miss three, and you're invited to a manor court session where the main agenda is deciding what piece of your life they'll take next. So you find ways. You water down the ale before trading it. You tell the steward you lost more grain to crows than you actually did. You even throw some extra out near the path as evidence. The crows are thrilled. You keep the fat chicken hidden and give them the stringy one that bites. You lie. A lot, but politely. You once buried a sack of beans in the yard to avoid handing it over. You told your wife it was strategic planting. You both laughed for the first time in days. And sometimes you get creative. Like when your cousin staged a fake wedding to avoid the marriage fee. 2 witnesses, 1 sheep, a very confused priest. By the time anyone realized it wasn't binding, they were already back in the field planting onions like nothing happened. Or when your brother dressed as a friar to get free bread from the next village, got caught, claimed he was on a spiritual fast. Somehow it worked. You get tired of owing. You start keeping mental tallies. 3 days, labor for the Lord. 10 eggs to the reeve. Half a fleece to the church. A smile to the miller, so he won't accidentally mismeasure your flour again. Your debt becomes your identity. You dream of a world where you could just keep what you grow. Where your work leads to rest instead of more work. Where your goat isn't legally obligated to give birth on church property so the priest can claim the kid. Here's a quirky bit. Some peasants would hide their taxes by pretending animals ran away. Lost chickens. Stolen pigs. One guy swore a fox took his goose, even though someone saw him eating it the next day. The steward fined him anyway for lying badly. You try not to think too hard about fairness. You just think about survival. And today that means you need to dig potatoes before sunset and hope none of them look too healthy, or the tithe collector might swing by again. You tell your son to harvest quietly. He nods like a soldier on a secret mission. You've trained him well. That night, you eat the small ones. Save the big ones. Bury the beautiful ones under the hearth just in case. You whisper a prayer, not to avoid taxes, but to avoid the shame of begging when winter hits and your debts are still unpaid. Then you blow out the candle, try to sleep. Try not to dream of ledgers and chickens with judgmental eyes. Because in the Middle Ages, even your dreams owe someone rent. You want something more. Not riches, not castles, not even a feather pillow, although, let's be honest, that sounds like sorcery. No, you want to learn, to read, to write your name without copying the priest's angry scowl, to know something that isn't just how to spot blight on barley, or which side of the pig to stand on when it's angry. You want to understand the world beyond your village. But dreaming of knowledge when you're poor in the Middle Ages is like dreaming of wings. Beautiful. Useless. And, if spoken out loud, suspicious. Because education, that belongs to monks, priests, nobles, boys born under the right roof, not to you. You hear the words sometimes. Latin, French, the swirling curlicues of illuminated letters when the priest unfurls a scroll. It's beautiful, confusing, a little magical. You once stared at the carved words over the church door so long, someone asked if you were having a vision. You weren't. You were just wondering. Your cousin says you don't need books to plow a field. The Reeve says too much thinking makes a man lazy. The blacksmith says, hammer's the only teacher I ever needed. Right before smacking his thumb and inventing a new swear word. Still, you ask questions, quiet ones. You watch the priest when he writes. You ask Tilda how she learned her herbs. You memorize the prayers, not because you believe they'll save you, but because they have rhythm, music, a logic your hands never learned, but your ears do. You try to write your name with a stick in the mud. It looks more like a squashed frog. You laugh anyway. Historians still argue how common literacy was among peasants. Most say, barely. A few exceptions here and there. Someone taught by a wandering friar. A merchant's child who picked it up on the road. But for the vast majority, words were something done to you, not something you did. You once met a traveling minstrel. He wore a faded red hat and smelled like cheese left in the sun. But he knew things. Tales of kings and curses, battles and betrayals, poems that made people weep and sigh and believe in love again, if only for the length of a song. You asked him where he learned all that. Books, he said, then added, and trouble. You believed both. That night, you whispered his poem to yourself in bed, hoping it would stick. It did. You still remember the last line. Even a candle knows how to fight the dark. You look at your hands. Rough, cracked, dirty, but still capable. Maybe, just maybe, they could learn something else. You ask the priest if he'll teach you letters. He laughs, then sighs, then says, fine, but you clean the church first, and no questions about theology. You agree faster than you've ever agreed to anything. He teaches you the alphabet, slowly, grudgingly. 1 letter per week. You draw them in ash, in the dirt, on the barn wall, until your wife makes you scrub it off. You practice after chores when the others are asleep. You mumble the sounds to yourself like spells. The letters begin to mean things. They open doors in your brain you didn't know were locked. One night, your son catches you tracing letters in the firelight. He asks what you're doing. You tell him. He sits beside you. You draw an A together. It's lopsided. He claps anyway. Here's a quirky fact. Some peasants learned to read only the Psalms because they were told those were the safe parts. Reading too much could make you arrogant, or worse, heretical. You weren't learning to question God. You were learning to obey better. But for you, it's not about obedience. It's about possibility. If you can read, maybe you can choose. Choose when to sow, when to trade, when to leave. Choose to write your own name on something that matters. Choose to believe you are more than just another backbent under someone else's burden. One morning, you carve your name into a plank of wood. It's shaky, ugly even, but it's yours. Your son carves his beside it. And suddenly, the future looks like something you might have a say in. You don't tell the others. Not yet. But when you walk past the church next time, you don't look up in awe. You look straight at the door and wonder what else you could learn to open. You've worked. You've survived. You've played by every rule you never agreed to. And now, standing at the edge of your days, with fingers stiff and back bowed, there's only one reward you're certain of. The next life. Because if you were born poor in the Middle Ages, the afterlife was your only retirement plan. You're not entirely sure what heaven looks like. No one is. But they say there are golden streets, food without working, warmth without chopping, singing without chores, beds without fleas. It sounds made up. Too perfect. But when your days are a cycle of cold, debt, hunger, and ache, even made-up things start to sound reasonable. The priest talks about salvation every week. Well, mostly. He spends a lot of time on hell, too. Lakes of fire, eternal punishment, misbehaving children roasting like chestnuts, comforting stuff. You listen, nod, drop your knees to the cold floor, whisper prayers in the same breath you use to curse the mud on your boots. God forgives. You hope. But faith isn't just Sunday morning in a stone building. It's how you live. You give to the church, even when you can't afford to. You kneel when told. You confess things you barely understand. You ask forgiveness for sins you can't define. You fear dying during a bad dream because what if that counts? You've watched friends pass on, some in peace, others not. You helped wash their bodies. You helped dig their graves. You listened as someone mumbled final rites and swore, they're in a better place. You hope it's true. Historians still argue whether peasants truly believed in heaven and hell as described by the clergy, or if it was more cultural habit than heartfelt conviction. Truth is, it doesn't matter. When this life gives you nothing, you need to believe the next one will, even if it's just to get out of bed in the morning. You've tried to live a good life. You've worked hard, helped others, suffered in silence mostly. You're not perfect. You remember that time you hid bread from the tithe collector. That time you told your neighbor's goat you wished it would explode. But overall, you've done your best. And now, as you grow slower, softer, closer to the end, you spend more time at church, not because you're scared, but because you're tired. You want rest. Real rest. The kind that doesn't come after working a field or hauling firewood. The kind where no one wakes you up to ask where the broom went. The kind where you don't dream of wolves at the door. You imagine it sometimes, the final sleep. A field, a warm sun, a loaf of bread that never runs out. Everyone you've lost, laughing, well-fed, not coughing. No more taxes. No more aching knees. No more fear. Just peace. You hope it's not a lie. You need it not to be. Because if there's nothing after all this, then the joke's been crueler than anyone thought. But you don't think it's nothing. Because even though life has bent you, broken you, stolen from you, you still loved. You loved your children, your animals, the first frost, the first flower, the way your wife hummed when she thought no one was listening, the smell of bread baking on a lucky day, the joy of seeing your name written down. That counts for something. And so when the time comes, when your breath shortens and your hands stop shaking because they finally stop trying, you close your eyes and picture it. A place where you don't have to earn your rest, where you don't owe anyone anything, where you're not poor. You're just free. The fire is low now, the room quiet. Only the faint crackle of embers, the distant hoot of an owl beyond the shutters, and the soft breath of someone finally resting after a long, long day. You've been through a lot tonight. You've trudged through muddy lanes, carried buckets under gray skies, dodged taxes, and whispered stories by candlelight. You've lost teeth, kept secrets, and carved your name in the dirt. You've bent under centuries of weight, of rules, of duty, of silence. But here you are, still here, still breathing, still you. The world of the poor in the Middle Ages was never kind. It didn't wait. It didn't ask. It took. It pushed. It demanded. But it also sang, softly sometimes, like bread rising, like old friends laughing, like the sound of rain that meant the harvest would grow. You found warmth in scraps, courage in chores, and love in places no one expected. And now, finally, you rest. There's nothing more to do. The fields are quiet. The chickens have settled. The debts can wait. The fire's low but still glowing. Let it be enough for tonight. Let your breathing slow. Let your shoulders drop. Let the weight you carried, buckets, burdens, names, never spoken, fall gently from your arms and disappear into the straw beneath you. You lived. You endured. You mattered. That's enough. So now, close your eyes. Let the village fade. Let the wind in the rafters hush its song. Let the dark wrap around you like wool, like sleep, like a promise that tomorrow can be softer. You've walked the long path. You've seen what it was. Now you can rest. Sleep well, traveler.